that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me here today. This is going to be a very hard act to follow, and I'm afraid you're going to move me on the stage when I tell you what my perspective is. So I suppose just to explain what my role is specifically in DeFerris, and that might give you a bit of context for where I want to go with the slides. So just to say, I suppose, just where I'm taking you now, I suppose, is a bit more to the national perspective. Also that, while DeFerris itself, obviously, our whole mission is around helping individuals to achieve their fullest potential, however they may wish to do that, and that's their full educational potential, their full economic potential, their full social potential. So, it's a huge gamut of work across the department. My role is in relation to skills policy and enterprise engagement. And I suppose I would say that, it's a very high level framework look that I take at these issues. The enterprise engagement piece is a little bit of a misnomer, because while we would be very, very engaged with enterprise and dealing with enterprise, they are not the only stakeholders we speak to. So we're also engaging with social partners, we're also engaging with providers all the time. So just to put a little bit of context around it, and as I say, to ask you to bear with my sort of slightly more narrow, more economically focused perspective on this. So today I'm going to touch on, a few things, and very likely in a high level way, and hopefully we can come to questions later on if we wish to. So really what we mean by skills in terms of what I'm talking about when I'm going out talking to people, why those skills matter, why continuous learning matters. And you know that I'm using the term continuous as opposed to lifelong, because it's really a continuum throughout the life cycle, dipping in and out as people wish and as they need to. Then a little bit on the policy framework, both nationally and internationally, and Lisa would have touched on some of these pieces that I want to speak to a little bit, and then the next steps of where we are now and what we hope to do as a department to sort of support everything that you're doing in your communities and in your institutions to help us move the dial on these really important issues. So when I talk about skills, I'm talking about a really broad definition. I'm not talking necessarily about just technical skills, being able to operate a particular piece of machinery or write a particular code or go out and service an offshore wind farm, although those are all really, really important skills. We were also talking about transversal skills, and actually transversal skills, and a lot of people in the room today will, have a very deep interest in this area, and I know Nora and her team are people who we talk about this all the time, around the transversal skills. So basically, in a world of increasing digitization, what differentiates us? What differentiates people? And those are our human skills. How we interact with teams, how we activity, how we present to people, how we learn, how we set up a culture of continuous learning. So those transversal skills, also technical skills, as I mentioned, things like working with AI, and things like operating tools that help us all to do our work in a better way. And there's a range of different ways we can acquire these skills. So they can be, long accredited programs of study. They can be, an undergraduate degree, a master's program, that kind of traditional route. They can also be slightly more focused accredited programs of study, things like, for example, the Springboard Plus program. But there are also skills that require short, sharp, workplace-focused interventions. And they can be things that are required from my regrets. But they can also be things like, I'm sure everybody in this room has done something like a GDPR course. Like that's a skill that people acquire through workplace-focused interventions. And I think people forget that those are also equally valuable skills in helping people to do their work. And so those sort of differentiations between the sort of the way we acquire skills. And I just pick up on something that Lindsay mentioned in terms of research. There are a range of skills, and I suppose just to step back for a moment and just say to you that, the tertiary system is not just about you sort of developing your skills, it's also about knowledge acquisition. It's not just about learning, on a course, it's also about research. So there's a whole a whole big bulk of a system out there that needs to operate kind of cohesively, and people need to take their learnings from research and apply it in the real world, and learning how to apply theoretical knowledge to real world environments is also a skill. And just going back to the piece that Lindsay mentioned about, research around lifelong learning and what it means, and then going forward with that, and bringing that innovative practice into what you do every day is also a skill. So, when we talk about skills, I personally, in my role, am probably very focused on workplace development, but skills are broader than that. And I think Lindsay made a very good point about, this idea of the holistic and skills being at war with each other. That's a false dichotomy as far as I'm concerned. They're a round issue, they're a virtuous circle. And learning how to learn for learning's sake, and then learning how to learn how to apply that in your workplace. It's part of the same system as such. So skills are a value proposition, as Lindsay mentioned. And again, taking it from the individual and the sort of the social good of learning, and learning for well-being, learning for your own development, but also, as Lindsay's research showed, and I'm very sure I recognise the quote in terms of the social development piece, and I'm very sure I know who gave it to her. But it is true that, having the right skills, whether we like it or not, does help us get good employment. So, that might not be why people, are on this journey from a provider's perspective, but for people who are learning, oftentimes it is to help them improve their chances of good employment. Oftentimes it is to help them transition between a precarious job and into better quality employment, or it's to give them the skills to stay in a field that they really like, that they need to keep up with. So, there is that piece of poverty proofing, there's that piece of economic well-being, as well as the societal and, I suppose, the emotional and mental well-being that having the right skills can give you. Skills are also a value proposition for business, and I suppose this is where I come in. As Lindsay was talking about, embedding that culture of continuous learning, that's not just for the people in the room here, and it's not just for individuals, it's also for business, so that business understand that continuous learning is very important to what they do. If their workforce is not properly skilled, their business will not survive. It will not thrive, it will not grow, it will not take the leap forward, it will not meet the challenges that are facing businesses here in Ireland all the time. So, there's a piece there about embedding that mindset so that employers see the value as well, and so that employers can engage with the learning system and help their workforces relate to the learning system. So overall, I suppose, my point being that it's good for both our economy and our society to value skills, to value lifelong and continuous learning. And it's also important for our international reputation. It's our unique selling point on an international stage. If you go and talk to the IDA, they will say that companies come to Ireland because they feel that there is good human capital, but also that they can influence the system to get the needs that they have supplied. So, it is a USP, and it's good for our international reputation in terms of attracting business into Ireland, but it's also good for our international reputation in terms of exporting, because people know they have a good value product produced in Ireland, or a good service developed in Ireland, because people know what they're doing. As simple as that. So just taking it back to the OECD review for a moment, the report was published in May 2023. I'm sure everybody in the room has read it deeply. It was a long project. I was project lead for Ireland, and we worked very, very closely with the OECD on it. And the priority areas really speak, I think, to what everybody in this room is interested in, and to what Lindsay mentioned in her presentation. So we took 4 priority areas, and actually the priority areas that were decided on foot of consultation with stakeholders. So, this wasn't something that was done in a vacuum in a room in DeFerris that, I got on the phone with the OECD and said, look, this is what you're going to look at. We came out and sensed sector with the sector. And the first one was around balance and skills, and that's around And I'm using skills, I suppose, as a catch-all for everything that I spoke about earlier on. So how do you develop your skills? Where do you develop your skills? Where do you acquire them? Is it in the workplace? Is it in higher education? Is it in the further education sector? How do they meet what you're doing in your life? How do they balance with what you're doing in your job? And how do you keep developing them? The development of relevant skills over the life course, which is basically what everybody in this room is really concerned with. How do you give people the opportunities to learn where they are? How do we empower people to learn? How do we embed that culture of learning that Lindsay mentioned that is so important in achieving what we want to do? The partnership to drive the shared skills agenda, and this actually just picks up on the recommendations that Lindsay was making around the forum to discuss these issues. And I suppose, I would say that Ireland is recognised internationally as being a very engaged country in terms of skills. And so, the stakeholders on, and the OECD actually said this, I'll come to stakeholder engagement in a moment, but they did say that they had never experienced the level of stakeholder engagement that they experienced in Ireland when they were doing projects before. I think we've done 17 different countries. And people here have very strong opinions on what should be happening. And that's great because it means people are thinking about what should be happening. It's not just a closed door, everything's fine, and we move on, and that's grand. So that's an important piece to know. And then the final piece is around skills and talent as drivers of innovation and productivity. As I mentioned, the importance of this to our economy, to individual businesses. So just getting into the partnership piece for a moment, we engaged about 270 stakeholders throughout the project, which doesn't sound like many, but a lot of these would have been like an individual who was representing a bigger group. And you can see that it ranged from, agencies, like say the AGA would be people there, the IUA would come under that category, government and agencies as well. Then there were, individual education and training providers, so individual university heads and TDs and so on, civil society and employers. And the whole aim of the project was around that partnership piece, as Lindsay mentioned. We had over 65 stakeholder meetings, and they included 2 really big national workshops at various points of the project. So we had a workshop when the OECD were kind of going through their assessment of the system and kind of getting a feel for how it looked, and to kind of sense check that with people. And then we had another big workshop where we sense checked kind of what the recommendations coming out of the report might be. And both of those workshops had over 300 stakeholders at them. They were very vibrant, very well run, and we really got a lot out of them. But we then did 6 regional workshops, and those regional workshops were more focused on the enterprise voice and more focused on people on the ground. Now, we did have education providers at them, but really we wanted to know at that point how provision was working for people who were in receipt of provision. And they gave us quite different and unique perspectives, I suppose, because, for example, at the national workshops, maybe we were talking to somebody like the Construction Industry Federation, whereas at a regional workshop, maybe I was sitting at a table with somebody who was a builder in Limerick and had 6 apprenticeships going through. So, it was a more granular, I suppose, more regional level piece of work. And then, of course, we also did a range of public consultations and surveys, and I suppose this engagement gave us a really good perspective on how the system is working for the people who are learning, for the people who are employing the people who learn, for the people who are providing the learning. And it gave an extra dimension to the OECD's work, so that rather than them just doing sort of a desk-based piece of research where they brought their international best practice and, told us, well, this is what the Nordics are doing, so this is what you should be doing too. And it was really grounded and really validated in what individuals were telling them. And that stakeholder piece, it can't be underestimated, the value of that. And I think that really picks up on Lindsay's point about the need for fora, the need for continuous partnership, the need to discuss the vision that we have for where we're going. not everything, as Kinsella, has to result in a new policy, but it has to result in us all being on the same page and knowing where we want to go. So I suppose the review, and I do not propose in any way to get into the I think 72 pieces of sub-recommendations that they gave us, but they're really, really detailed, they're really granular, and they're a really good blueprint for how we go forward. And they're the blueprint that I'm using in my work all the time, and they're the blueprint that other colleagues in Deference are using all the time in progressing towards a system that we want to achieve. So I suppose just to give you the headlines are that we have a burning platform for skills in Ireland. Skills matter, as I said. They matter for individuals, they matter for countries, they matter because the world is changing really, really fast. The scale and pace of change is such that we need to take a step change now. We have the issues that are facing us now, decarbonisation, digitalisation, the new developments in AI all the time. The demographic issue is a huge issue. There's the whole issue of deglobalisation. There's the issue of, how enterprise policy in Europe is changing now. So, we need to be alive to this, and we need to be ready to respond. So it's timely that now is the time that we consider how to build that system for the future. And when I talk about the future, I'm not talking about tomorrow, I'm talking about not day after tomorrow, I'm talking about, day after day after day after tomorrow. So, we need to be thinking long term here. To give you a little bit of detail on the findings, this is something everybody in this room knows. The share of young adults with a tertiary degree is significantly above the OECD average. Now, we can debate about, the value of skills for work and skills for life and what education means, the value of education. That's a separate issue. The issue that we're talking about here today is that we do well for our young people. We don't do well for our people once they leave university or once they leave their formal education system. So we know now that, in the world as it is today, a 3 or 4 year degree course is not going to fit you for a 30 or 40 year career. It's simply not. So we know that because of that, many Irish adults are falling behind because they don't have the right skills to thrive, either in their individual, well-being piece or in their workforce piece. Our participation in lifelong learning falls far behind the EU performers, the top performers. We're bang average, or we're slightly above average. I think we're now bang average as an EU country, and we're lagging the top performers by up to 60% in some cases. And I suppose from my own experience, there are concerns out there about labour and skills shortages now. Some of that is because there's a really tight labour market, and thankfully people are in work, and that means it's hard to recruit people. But some of it is skills gaps as well, and some of it is skills gaps, not for today, but skills gaps into the future, so sort of that future-proofing piece. Which basically means that, going back to what Lindsay was saying about investment and political will, in lifelong learning in general, there's also a need for that in what I would describe as skills. And some of that is around culture change in enterprise, as I mentioned. Some of it is around supporting management capabilities. And it's quite interesting. Over the last couple of weeks, we've had the results of some research that Enterprise Ireland have done. They do a project with some of the companies where they look at their skills needs. And one of the key skills needs that was coming out of enterprise was actually around talent development, talent retention, supporting people in the workforce to get the skills they need. So actually supporting people to get their skills, or actually supporting people through a lifelong learning journey has been identified as a skills need in enterprise. So that's quite interesting, because that means that enterprise, the message appears to be landing. That they know they need to do something about this, and they know that there's a certain level of onus on enterprise as well to step up to the plate. So just to touch very, very briefly, I suppose, on the international context and why we're not alone in this journey. This is something that is a Europe-wide issue, not just Europe-wide. It relates to all developed countries. there is a need to look at this whole issue of how we respond to the challenges that are coming against us, how we future-proof to meet the opportunities that are coming towards us. And we have engaged in social pillar commitments under the EU. We in Ireland have a target of 64% of adults being engaged in lifelong learning by 2030. The total European ambition is to get to 60%, but because we're slightly above average at the moment, our target is a little bit more ambitious. We're currently at, and that figure is actually slightly outdated, when we were 55% rather than 54%, but it's still quite a significant gap to make up. We know that average is not okay. We know that we're likely to have performance by over 6%. We know that we have this demographic change coming towards us. And we know that lifelong learning and continuous learning is the way to beat this bubble. And I suppose just to pick up on some of the things that Lindsay mentioned around, who the audience is here. In terms of lifelong learning rates, we know that people who are younger, more highly educated, and nearer to completion of their formal education journey are more likely to engage in learning. We know that there are certain professions that engage in continuous professional development all the time, and that counts towards lifelong learning. However, we also know that people who are older, people who are in jobs that are more at risk of automation, people who are further away from the lifelong learning or from the formal learning journey are less likely to engage in lifelong learning. So, those are a target group. They're a vulnerable cohort, and we need to step into place to enable them to learn in a way that suits them, so that we can address these ambitious targets that we have, but also so that we can do well for the people who need it most. So just to touch very briefly, and I promise I'm quite near the end, the way forward for Ireland, I just want to touch on this very briefly because I know we'll probably get into it a little bit more on the panel. This is currently the Year of Skills. Actually, this day next week, I'm going to be in Brussels for the closing event of the Year of Skills. But I would, just urge everybody in the room to remember that skills, learning, lifelong learning, continuous development, it's not a one-year proposition. This just happens to be the year that has been badged with that. But it's building on, I think, it's building on and catching up with what Ireland has been talking about for some time. So it's almost as if our EU colleagues have caught up with where we want to go. And we will have more work to do. It won't finish in May. It's not like that we're just going to shut up shop and stop talking about skills on the 1st of May. This is a piece of work that will continue into the future. And the reason for this is because learning, as we know, has changed. As I say, skills have a shelf life. And we do know from the World Economic Forum that for every single one of us in this room, we need to be looking at our own skills at a minimum every 2 years, just to keep up with how our work is going to change. And this is not in terms of a very automated sector. This is in terms of just having the tools and knowing how to use the tools that will help us do our work. So imagine if you're working in a more automated sector, or if you're in a sector that is at more risk of automation, how this is going to affect you. So our goal is to have a fully transformed 21st century model of learning and talent development. And this all centres on lifelong learning. It all centres on people having the opportunities throughout their life cycle to learn in a way that suits them and that gives them what they want. It's about learn and earn being intertwined throughout the life cycle. It's about embedding that culture in enterprise, about learning being a part of the work day. It's about embedding that piece of curiosity in individuals to see what's out there and to try to take the opportunities that we're all offering. And it's a piece for us in terms of going out and communicating that and making the system easier for people to understand. So our focus areas, I suppose, are on those pieces around short, flexible, blended skilling options. And I know I'm talking to people in the HE side today, but things like e-college are really game changing here. And things like microcredits, microclosets, well, I'll go to that a little bit more in a moment. The piece around supporting and trusting and partnering with employers, from my point of view and from the work I do, is really important. So an awful lot of what I do and my colleagues, and Anne will get into a little bit more detail on this when she's talking about the work of the Regional Skills Forum. An awful lot of what we do is trying to bring people on a journey with us, and an awful lot of that is bringing people who maybe feel that they're not a part of the skills ecosystem in the way that everybody here in the room knows you're part of the learning and development system. Sometimes in enterprise, people don't realise that they are actually a really important partner there, and we're doing a lot of work within the pairs to try and build that up all the time. We have done an awful lot, as I say, we have really good relationships with loads of employers now, and with people like IBEC and the IDA and EI, people who can get that message out for us. So that's a really key part of my work, and it is a focus area for me. This piece around the navigability through learning options, this is really key. And again, Anne will probably touch on this later on in terms of navigating for employers, but it's also really important for the individual learner. This was something that came up time and time again through the OECD review, and I would say it's the biggest stumbling block. As Lindsay said, if we're designing a system of, never mind a system of lifelong learning, if we were designing a system of education, a tertiary system at the moment, we would not start where we are. It is really complex, it's really rich, there's lots of diversity there are lots of options for people to learn, and lots of opportunities for people to learn, but it can be really hard for them to get under the bonnet of how they do that. And this is something that's really important to us, to try and do more of that. And just to mention, I suppose, one other event that we're going to be holding, some people in the room may be aware of the Framework for Lifelong Guidance that was developed between ourselves and the Department of Education. It was launched in December, and the whole idea is really that sort of continuum of guidance to people through the life cycle. And we're holding our first guidance forum on foot of that framework on the 7th of May. So that'll be a good event, and will help us get some visibility and line of sight into how we do better on that. So all of this is around supporting individualised continuous learning, journeys of learning and development for everybody who wants to engage in a way that suits them well. And just to mention, I suppose we have lots done, as I mentioned, the micro-credits, micro-qualifications, the further ed system, the guidance framework that I just mentioned there, the National Tertiary Office, and those degrees that are through the tertiary system. Like there are loads of pieces of work that have begun, and I think, to be fair, I think everybody in this room should be proud of what they've achieved. However, we have more to do, and that more to do is around information. And when I say information, I don't just mean sort of giving information about what the offerings are. I mean giving information about how important this is. I mean sharing information between people on the ground and policy makers, and so that there's that exchange of views, and so that we have a shared vision of where we're going on this. The piece around flexibility, I think, is really important, and I think Lindsay picked up on this really well in her presentation. It's not just about what we think in our ivory towers flexibility is. It's about what the learner thinks flexibility is, and it's about what the learner needs. And we need to be aware of that. And so we need to do our utmost to support, in my case, enterprise, but in your case, learners, to avail of the opportunities that are out there, to understand how important availing of those opportunities are, and to go forward together so that we can achieve our vision of what our country will be, which is, economically sustainable, socially cohesive, and with people supported to achieve what they want to achieve in the way they want to achieve that. So that's me. Thank you very much.